The first lash struck Mae Calder across the shoulder before anyone in Silver Mesa decided to interfere. By the time Reed Halston lifted the horsewhip again, the widow had already refused his paper twice, and half the freight yard had gathered to watch her refuse it a third time. "Sign it," Halston said. Mae stood beside a wagon tongue in front of Calder Forge, one hand gripping the edge of the workbench she had dragged outside that morning. The paper lay on it beneath an iron nut. It declared her shop unsafe. It surrendered her right to repair freight wagons operating under the Silver Mesa hauling contracts, and at the bottom was a line for her name. Mae looked at it. Then, at Halston. No, the freight contractor's cuffs were clean despite the red dust blowing through the yard. He straightened the left one with 2 fingers. "Your husband nearly sent 4 men over Red Knuckle Grade. My husband is dead. That does not make his work sound. Neither does whipping me." A few men shifted near the hitching rail. Nobody stepped forward. Halston had contracts with nearly every freight outfit between Silver Mesa and the territorial road north. A driver who angered him could spend a month waiting for a load. Mae knew that. Halston knew she knew it. He lifted the whip. A hand closed around his wrist before he could swing. Silas Sloane had crossed the yard without Mae seeing him. He was tall, 44, lean through the waist, with road dust on his dark coat and a revolver riding low at his right hip. Halston jerked his arm. Silas did not release it. "That's enough." Halston stared at him. "You work for me." "Worked." Silas nodded toward the freight office. "I collected my final wages 10 minutes ago." Halston's eyes dropped toward the revolver. "So you think that makes this your concern?" Silas released his wrist. "No, the whip did." Halston stepped back. The crowd opened slightly. Most people in Silver Mesa knew Silas Sloane's name even if they had never spoken to him. He had guarded freight through Apache country, escorted payroll wagons, and survived enough armed disputes that men repeated his reputation before he ever reached a town. Halston knew it too. His hand tightened on the whip. "You planning to draw on me?" Silas's hand moved. The revolver came free. A sharp murmur passed through the yard. But Silas did not raise it. He held it pointed toward the dirt. "I'm planning to make sure you don't strike her again." Mae turned on him. "Put it away." Silas looked at her. She stood straight despite the torn cloth at her shoulder. "Mrs. Calder, put it away." The yard had gone quiet enough for the forge fire to be heard snapping behind her. Silas studied her face. Then he returned the revolver to its holster. Halston gave a short laugh. "There, even she knows what you are." Mae stepped toward the bench. "No, I know what you want him to become." That stopped Halston's smile. A wagon rolled into the north end of the yard. 2 mules pulled it slowly between the buildings. Beside the driver sat Ephraim Vale, the territorial freight inspector, his gray coat folded across his knees. He saw the crowd. Then the whip. Then Mae's torn sleeve. Vale climbed down. "What happened?" "Business," Halston said. Mae answered at the same time. "He tried to force me to sign that." Vale picked up the paper. His eyes moved over it. "I did not authorize this. You condemned her husband's brake assembly yourself. I inspected the wreck afterward. That is not the same thing." Halston pointed toward the forge. "You know what happened. Jonah Calder put bad work under a freight wagon. I lost a contract and nearly lost a crew." Mae's fingers rested against the bench. She did not argue. Vale noticed. "So did you come here to close the forge?" she asked. "Or inspect it?" Vale looked toward the open doors. Inside, tools hung in careful rows. A half-shaped brake shoe rested beside the anvil. Chalk marks covered a black iron plate on the main bench. "I came because Halston filed a safety complaint." "Then, inspect." Halston shook his head. She has her answer already. No, Vale said. She has a complaint against her. He walked inside the forge. Mae followed. After a moment, Silas did too. Vale moved slowly from bench to bench. He touched nothing at first. At a rear shelf, he stopped. 3 fresh lengths of iron stock lay beside seasoned hardwood blocks. You still intend to repair freight brakes? Yes, under the Calder name? Mae hesitated. Yes, Vale turned. Then I will give you a path. Halston appeared in the doorway. You cannot be serious. Vale ignored him. 3 brake assemblies. Built here. Every critical stage inspected before you close it. Static load test on each. Mae listened. And after that? Final road test. Where? Red Knuckle Grade. The words changed the room. Even Silas looked toward her. Red Knuckle was steep enough that experienced teamsters checked their brake chains before starting down, and checked them again after the first bend. Vale continued. You build 3 assemblies that pass my inspection. Then 1 goes under a loaded freight wagon. You take it down the grade under controlled conditions. How long? 12 days. Halston laughed from the doorway. She cannot do that in 12 days. Mae looked at Vale. If I do, I certify Calder Forge for freight work under my authority. And if I fail, you close the forge to commercial hauling work. Mae turned toward the fire. For months, she had defended the shop 1 customer at a time. This would decide all of it at once. Vale reached into his coat and removed a small notebook. I also require surety. Materials, test damage, road crew. $50. Mae said nothing. She did not have $50. Halston knew that too. He straightened his cuff. Seems the decision made itself. Silas reached inside his coat. He placed a folded pay envelope on the bench. Vale looked at it. So did mine, Silas said. Mae stared at him. No, that's $58. I heard you. I don't need all of it. You do not know me. Silas met her eyes. I know you refused to sign. That does not make you part owner of my trouble. I didn't say it did. Mae looked at the envelope, then at his gun belt. If I take that money, there is a condition. Silas waited. You do not threaten Halston. You do not threaten his drivers. You do not turn my forge into a place where men come to see whether Silas Sloane is as fast as the stories say. Halston's mouth bent slightly. Silas did not look at him. All right. Mae held his gaze another second. Say it plain. No gunfight over Calder Forge. Vale closed his notebook. Then I will return tomorrow morning for the first inspection. He walked out. Halston remained at the door. 12 days will not fix what your husband did. Mae crossed the forge. From a peg above the rear bench, she removed a cracked iron retaining plate. The fracture ran almost through its center. Silas watched her carry it to the main bench. Halston's face changed when he saw it. Mae set the broken plate beside the fresh iron stock. No, she said, but 12 days may show what I can do. Halston left without answering. Outside, the freight yard slowly came back to life. Mae turned toward Silas. You ever worked a forge? No, know anything about brake assemblies? Enough to know I don't. She handed him a leather apron. Good. Men who think they know everything are hard to teach. Silas took it. Mae looked once at the cracked plate. Then she pushed the first length of iron into the coals. Tomorrow Vale starts judging my work. She reached for the bellows handle. Today we make sure he has something worth judging. By sunrise, Mae had already rejected Silas's first idea. You want to move the anvil? Closer to the door. No, it would give us more light. It would give me 3 extra steps every time I need the quench barrel. Silas looked from the anvil to the barrel. Mae handed him a shovel. Coal bin. He took the shovel. Yes, ma'am. She stopped. Don't do that either. Silas almost smiled. "All right, Mae," that she allowed. Ephraim Vale arrived before 8, carrying chalk, calipers, and the same small notebook he had used the day before. He examined the iron stock first, then the hardwood. Then every pin Mae had laid across a clean cloth on the bench. "You bought these before the complaint?" "Most of them." "Most?" Mae pointed toward 2 pins. "Those came from Weller's shop this morning." Vale scratched something into his notebook. Silas had gone to Weller's before breakfast. The owner had sold him the pins but refused to extend Mae credit for anything else. Halston had already been talking. Vale marked the first piece of iron with white chalk. "You may heat this." Mae pushed it into the forge. For the next 3 hours, the shop became a place of short instructions and ringing steel. Silas worked the bellows. Badly at first. Too much air sent sparks climbing toward the hood. Mae caught his wrist. "Steady. I thought hotter was better. Hotter is how men ruin good iron while feeling productive." Silas eased the handle. The fire settled. Mae watched the metal change. Not by clock, by color. She drew it out when the center reached the shade she wanted and carried it to the anvil. Her hammer fell in measured strokes. Vale watched from 2 steps away. Silas watched from the bellows. Mae did not strike hard simply because she could. She worked the metal a little at a time, turned it, checked the line, then worked it again. When she finished the first shaping, she ran her thumb along the edge. Then she turned the piece and checked it from the opposite side. Silas noticed. "You always do that twice?" "Yes, why?" "Because iron looks different when you stop admiring your first angle." Vale glanced up from his notebook. Silas said nothing more. By noon, 2 freight wagons had passed Calder Forge without stopping. Mae knew both drivers. One usually brought his wagon in whenever a wheel began talking louder than the team. Neither man looked toward the open doors. Silas noticed that too. "Halston?" Mae lowered the heated part into the quench barrel. Steam climbed between them. "Probably. You want me to talk to them?" "No, they may listen. They may lose their work." The metal hissed. Mae lifted it out. "I will not ask a man to feed my forge by taking food from his own table." Silas leaned against the bellows handle. "That makes Halston's job easier. For now." She carried the piece back to the bench. Vale inspected it after it cooled. He measured 3 points, then 5. He scratched chalk beside one fastening hole. Too narrow. Mae looked. "By how much?" Vale told her. Silas expected an argument. Mae picked up the piece. "Then I do it again." She tossed 6 hours of work into the scrap bin. Silas stared at it. "You could open that hole. I could. And Vale asked whether Calder Forge can build safe freight brakes, not whether I can hide a bad measurement. Vale's pencil stopped. He looked at her for 1 second, then continued writing. The second attempt passed. That evening, Mae ate bread and beans at the workbench because there was no time to walk home before dark. Silas sat on an overturned keg. His coat hung from a peg. His gun belt remained around his waist. Mae noticed where his right hand rested when 2 riders slowed outside, not on the revolver, on his belt buckle. The riders continued past. Mae tore another piece of bread. "You can take that thing off in here." Silas looked down. "The gun?" "Yes," he hesitated. "You told me not to use it." "I did. That seems sufficient. It isn't comfortable around hot iron. It's been comfortable everywhere else." Mae looked at him. "That may be part of your problem." He studied her face, then unbuckled the belt. He hung it beside his coat. The revolver rested there until they closed the shop. The next morning brought 2 observers. Vale had invited them. Harlan Beck, a freight driver with 20 years on mountain roads, stood with his arms folded beside the door. The other was a younger teamster named Clay Morrow. Neither man seemed pleased to be there. Mae explained every stage before she performed it. material, heating, shaping, pin fit, brake block seating, load direction. She did not talk longer than necessary. When Harlan asked why she had changed the block grain from the type Jonah used, Mae paused. Because this orientation carries the load better. Jonah didn't think so. Mae looked down at the hardwood. No, Harlan waited. Mae returned to work. Silas saw the question remain in the room. By the fourth day, the first assembly was ready for static testing. Vale had them mounted beneath a heavy freight frame behind the forge. Chains ran from the frame to stacked iron weights. Mae tightened each fastening herself. Thumb along the joint. Second angle. Again, Vale raised his hand. Silas and Harlan took up the load. The brake arm groaned. The chains drew tight. Mae crouched beside the assembly. Nothing shifted. Vale added another weight. Then another. The hardwood block pressed hard against the test wheel. The pin held. The iron held. After 10 minutes, Vale stepped forward and put a chalk mark across the mounting plate. First assembly passes. Mae stood. She wiped her hands on her apron. That was all. But when Silas handed her the water dipper, she took it without checking whether she could manage alone. By the 6th day, the second assembly was halfway finished. The boycott had worsened. 3 wagons waited outside Martin Pike's repair shed at the far end of Silver Mesa. None waited outside Calder Forge. A supplier refused to sell Mae another length of iron unless she paid cash. Silas paid. Mae wrote the amount in a small account book immediately. You plan to repay every cent? Yes. What if I stay long enough that it stops mattering? Her pencil stopped. She looked at him. Then it will matter differently. Silas let that answer stand. That afternoon, Vale came early. He carried the cracked retaining plate Mae had placed beside the bench on the first day. He set it under the window. Where did this come from? You know where. Jonah's failed wagon. Yes, Vale turned it in the light. The retaining plate cracked after the brake block overheated. Mae said nothing. Vale looked toward the hardwood stacked against the wall. Why did Jonah put green wood into a mountain brake assembly? The forge seemed suddenly louder. Silas stopped sorting bolts. Mae kept her eyes on the plate. Ask me something else. I cannot. Vale's voice stayed calm. This trial is about whether Calder Forge understands what failed. I understand. Then tell me. Mae's hand went to the edge of the bench. Her thumb pressed against an old hammer mark in the wood. Finally, she said, I told him not to use it. Silas did not move. Vale waited. Mae looked at the cracked plate. He had a freight train leaving before daylight. The seasoned blocks weren't ready. Jonah said the green piece would hold until Caldwell. Did he believe that? He wanted to. Vale closed his notebook. Did you know it was unsafe? Mae's eyes lifted. Yes, Silas watched her shoulders settle, as if something heavy had finally been placed where it belonged. Vale spoke more quietly. Did you tell anyone after the wreck? No. Why? Mae looked toward the open forge doors. Across the road, a man walking past turned his head away when he saw her looking. He died 6 weeks later. She picked up the plate. After that, every time someone called the failure bad material, I let them. Silas said Mae. She shook her head once. No, he asked. He gets the answer. Vale took a slow breath. I have to include this in the certification record. I know. He opened the notebook again. There is something else. Mae looked at him. Vale's mouth tightened. Halston filed another request this morning. For what? He wants the trial stopped unless your explanation of Jonah's repair is given publicly before the freight men who still use this road. Silas turned toward the door. Mae saw his hand move toward where his gun belt usually hung. It stopped at his empty waist. Vale continued. I have not granted the request. Yet, Mae said. Vale did not answer immediately. Then he said, I have until tomorrow morning to decide. Mae looked down at the cracked plate in her hands. For 6 months, she had fought to keep Calder Forge alive. Now keeping it might require her to be the one who finally broke Jonah Calder's name in front of the whole town. By 9 the next morning, nearly every freight driver in Silver Mesa had heard that Mae Calder was going to speak about her husband. By 10, the yard outside her forge was full. Not crowded enough to feel like a celebration. Crowded enough to feel like judgment. Mae stood inside the open doors with the cracked retaining plate on the bench before her. Silas worked the bellows, though there was nothing in the fire yet. He had offered once to stand beside her. She had told him to keep working. So he did. Ephraim Vale arrived carrying his notebook. Reed Halston came 5 minutes later. Halston took a place near the front, dressed as if he were attending a business meeting, instead of watching a widow explain the worst mistake her husband had ever made. He straightened one cuff. Mae saw it. Her fingers stopped against the edge of the bench. Vale stepped forward. This is not a trial. Halston gave a dry laugh. Vale looked at him. It is not. The yard settled. Vale continued. Calder Forge is undergoing a safety certification. I have asked Mrs. Calder to explain the failure that led to the present complaint, because workmanship cannot be judged honestly if its known mistakes are hidden. Mae picked up the cracked plate. It felt heavier than it had the day before. She carried it outside. Harlan Beck stood near the hitching rail. Clay Morrow stood beside him. Several men Mae had repaired wagons for over the years would not quite meet her eyes. Halston did. Mae stopped beside Vale. This came from Jonah's last mountain freight repair. She held the plate where the men nearest her could see the fracture. The plate failed after the brake assembly overheated. Halston said, because the material was bad. Mae looked at him. No, that single word moved through the yard faster than shouting would have. Halston's expression changed. Mae kept going. The retaining plate was sound when Jonah installed it. The brake block was not. Harlan lowered his arms. Mae turned the cracked iron over. We were short of seasoned hardwood. The proper block was not ready. Her mouth had gone dry. Silas stood inside the forge now, not beside her, where she had asked him to remain. Mae continued. Jonah used green wood. Someone near the back muttered. She did not look toward the sound. I told him not to. That changed the yard again. Halston's eyes narrowed. Mae looked at the men in front of her. He knew it was a temporary repair. He believed it would hold to Caldwell. Did you? Harlan asked. No, the word came easier this time. I believed it could fail under a long descent. Harlan glanced toward Red Knuckle Grade in the distance. Mae nodded once. Yes. Halston stepped forward. So you knew. Silas moved inside the forge. His hand settled against his belt buckle. Mae answered before he could speak. I knew. And you let the wagon leave. Mae looked at the cracked plate. That is true. A wagon harness jingled somewhere behind the crowd. Nobody spoke. Mae lifted her eyes again. Jonah made the repair. I did not stop the wagon from leaving. After the wreck, people said the iron must have been defective. She paused. I let them say it. Halston looked almost pleased. Why? Because Jonah died before he had to answer for it. The pleasure left Halston's face. Mae turned toward the forge. For 6 months, I thought correcting the story meant betraying him. She set the plate on the bench. I was wrong. Vale watched her carefully. Mae ran her thumb across the crack. If Calder Forge stays open, it will stay open under work I can defend while I am alive. Nobody applauded. Mae had not wanted them to. Harlan Beck removed his hat. Clay Morrow stared at the ground. Halston said, that should end the certification. Vale faced him. No, Halston's jaw tightened. She admitted negligence. She admitted the failure. She protected it. And now she has corrected the record before completing the work under inspection. Vale opened his notebook. That matters. Halston stepped closer. My crew nearly went over a mountain because of that shop. Mae turned toward him. You have a right to remember that. He stopped. She continued. You do not have a right to whip me for it. Several men shifted. Halston looked around and seemed to notice, perhaps for the first time, that nobody had moved away from Mae. Vale closed his notebook. The certification continues. Halston left without another word. The freight yard remained quiet after he was gone. Then, Harlan Beck walked into the forge. He pointed toward the unfinished second assembly. You planning to finish that today? Yes. Need another pair of hands? Mae looked at him. I need someone who can hold a test frame steady. I can do that. Clay Morrow followed him inside. I can too. Mae nodded. No speech. No thanks. She went back to work. By sunset, the second brake assembly passed. On the 8th day, they began the third. Silas spent most of that morning hauling iron from a supplier 2 streets east. The owner had stopped insisting on cash. Mae noticed but did not mention it. The boycott had not disappeared. Halston still controlled too much freight. But wagons had begun slowing outside Calder Forge again. Some stopped. A broken wheel rim. A bent coupling. A loose wagon box brace. Mae refused every job that would interfere with the certification deadline. That cost her money. It also told people what the trial meant. On the 9th evening, Silas found her sitting on the back step of the forge with the cracked plate beside her. He sat 1 step below. For a while, neither spoke. Then Mae said, You heard all of it. Yes, you still put your money on my work. I put it on your work before I knew. That is not what I asked. Silas looked across the dark yard. I heard the truth. Mae waited. He rubbed coal dust from his thumb. Tomorrow morning the iron will still need shaping. She looked at him. That's your answer? It's the useful one. Mae looked down at the cracked plate. Then she picked it up and carried it inside. Good, she said. We start before daylight. On the 11th day, the third assembly passed its static load test. Vale marked it with chalk. 3 white lines. 3 approved assemblies. Only the road trial remained. Mae finally allowed herself to sit. Silas handed her water. She drank. Then Vale said, The test wagon arrives at 6 tomorrow morning. Mae looked toward the yard. Halston's team? Yes, his contract controls the certified freight teams available here. Silas said, You trust him to send them? Vale did not answer. Mae already knew the answer. At 6 the next morning, the yard was empty. At 7, still empty. Vale checked his watch. At 8, a boy from the freight office arrived carrying Halston's message. No team available. No explanation. Silas read the note once and folded it. I'll go get him. Mae said, No, he's killing the test. He wants you angry. Vale looked toward the western road. I cannot extend the certification past sundown. Mae stared at the empty hitching rail. Then, Harlan Beck spoke from behind her. There's the eastern bypass. Mae turned. Redwash? He nodded. Old freight cut comes into the upper grade from the east. Vale frowned. That road hasn't carried a loaded wagon in years. It can. Mae looked toward the sun, then toward the distant red ridge. How long? Harlan answered. If we leave in the next half hour, maybe enough. Mae walked into the forge. She took the cracked retaining plate from the bench. For 1 second she held it. Then, she hung it back on the peg. Silas watched her reach for her gloves. How bad is red wash? Worse than red knuckle. That isn't encouraging. Mae pulled the gloves tight. We don't need encouraging. She looked at the clock. We need daylight. Harlan Beck owned the wagon they used. It was an older freight rig, heavier than Mae would have chosen, with iron-rimmed wheels and enough scarred timber to show that it had already survived roads worse than most men wanted to remember. "Loaded weight?" Vale asked. Harlan named it. Vale checked the figure against his notebook. "It will do." Mae crawled beneath the rear axle and inspected the newly fitted brake assembly herself. Pin, plate, block, chain. She ran her thumb along the mounting joint. Then checked it again from the opposite side. Silas stood nearby, holding the lantern low. "You see anything?" "No, that good?" "It means I haven't found anything bad yet." He nodded. That answer made sense to him now. By 9, the wagon was loaded with the required test weight. 2 mules were harnessed ahead. Harlan offered to drive. Mae shook her head. "My certification. Your repair doesn't mean you have to handle the team. It does today." Vale looked at her. "You understand that if I believe the descent becomes unsafe, I stop the test." Mae climbed onto the box. "You should." Silas mounted beside the wagon. His gun belt was still on. Mae noticed. He noticed her noticing. "It stays holstered. It better." They left Silver Mesa by the east road. Red wash began gently enough. Then the land broke open. The wagon road narrowed between low shelves of red stone and dropped through a dry cut where last spring's water had carved ruts deep enough to catch a wheel. Mae kept the team slow. She used the brake only in short pulls. Feel, release, listen. The new block gave off a dry wooden scrape. Not chatter, not slipping. Good. Silas rode ahead through the worst stretches, checking where the wagon could pass. Once he dismounted and rolled a loose stone out of the left wheel track. Mae waited. No one hurried. The deadline mattered. Breaking the wagon mattered more. Near noon, they reached the fork that climbed toward Red Knuckle's upper approach. 3 riders were waiting there. Reed Halston sat in the middle. Mae stopped the team. Silas rode back toward her. Halston looked at the wagon. "So this is your answer." Mae kept both hands on the reins. "It's a road. It's not the authorized approach." Vale rode forward from behind the wagon. "The inspection concerns the grade and the braking system. The approach is not specified." Halston's face tightened. "You're bending the rules for her." "No." Vale opened his notebook. "I'm reading them." Halston looked at Silas. That was when Mae understood why he was really there. Not for the wagon. For him. Halston smiled slightly. "Still working bellows, Sloane?" Silas said nothing. "Funny occupation for a man with your reputation." Silas rested one hand on the saddle horn. Halston dismounted. "You used to answer men." Mae saw Silas's right hand move. Not toward the revolver, toward his belt buckle. Halston stepped closer. "You hiding behind a widow now?" Silas looked at Mae. She did not tell him what to do. She had already told him 12 days ago. This choice had to be his. Halston stopped 10 feet away. "Draw." Silas shook his head. "No." One of Halston's riders laughed. Halston's mouth hardened. "You afraid?" Silas looked at him for a long moment. Then he dismounted. Mae's grip tightened on the reins. Silas unbuckled his gun belt. He wrapped it once around the saddle horn. Then he stepped away from the horse. "I'm busy." Halston stared at the revolver hanging there. For the first time, he had nothing useful to say. Mae clicked her tongue. The mules started forward. The wagon rolled past him. Silas remounted and followed. Nobody fired. Nobody needed to. The upper edge of Red Knuckle Grade came into view just after 3. Vale checked the wagon again. Harlan checked the harness. Mae checked the brake assembly. The sun had begun leaning west. "Once we start," Vale said, "we finish or we fail." Mae climbed back onto the box. Silas rode alongside. "Want me close?" "Yes, how close?" "Close enough to hear me. Far enough not to spook the team." He nodded. Mae released the brake. The wagon began down. The first bend was easy. The second was not. The grade sharpened. The loaded wagon pushed hard against the mules. Mae drew the brake lever back. The new block engaged. Wood scraped iron. The wagon slowed. She eased. Pulled again. Steady, the smell of heated wood rose behind, not burning. Just working. Halfway down, the right wheel struck a shallow rut. The wagon lurched. One mule kicked sideways against the traces. Mae released the brake for 1 second. Straightened the team. Then reapplied pressure gradually. Silas stayed where she had told him. No shouting, no reaching for the reins. The wagon settled. Vale rode behind, watching every movement. At the final steep stretch, Mae could feel the whole load trying to outrun the team. She pulled harder. The lever resisted, then held. The brake shoe bit. The wagon slowed enough for the mules to regain their footing. Mae kept it there. Not too much, not too little. The bottom of the grade came closer. Then, the ground flattened. Mae released the brake. The wagon rolled another 30 yards and stopped. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Vale dismounted. He went straight beneath the wagon. Mae climbed down and joined him. The block was hot. The plate held. The pin had not shifted. Vale checked every chalk mark. Then he stood. Calder Forge passes. Mae looked at the wagon. Not at Silas. Not at Harlan. At the assembly, 3 white chalk marks were still visible beneath the dust. Silas came to stand beside her. That it? Mae nodded. That's it. Back in Silver Mesa, the story traveled faster than they did. By evening, 2 independent drivers had already brought wagons to Calder Forge. A third came the next morning. Within the week, Harlan and Clay gave statements about Halston's obstruction at Red Wash and the earlier assault in the freight yard. Others followed. Sheriff Danner, who had avoided Halston for years, finally had enough witnesses to act without pretending he had seen nothing. Halston did not vanish. He did not confess. He hired a lawyer, disputed every accusation, and lost contracts while the matter moved through ordinary channels. That was enough. His hold on Silver Mesa cracked because men stopped behaving as if it were permanent. 3 weeks later, Mae stood inside the forge at dawn. A new brake plate rested on the bench. She positioned the steel stamp. M. Calder. 1 hard hammer blow. The letters sank cleanly into the iron. Silas stood by the door. Mae looked at his gun belt. He unbuckled it, hung it on a wooden peg, then crossed the forge and took hold of the bellows handle. Outside, the first certified freight wagon of the morning waited in the pale light. Mae pushed the iron toward the coals. Silas worked the bellows. The fire brightened between them. If you enjoyed watching Mae and Silas earn this ending, subscribe and like for more Wild West stories.